When I invited my parents over for Christmas dinner, I pictured laughter, clinking glasses, maybe even a tear or two when they opened their gifts. Instead, I watched my father's fork freeze halfway to his mouth, and in that single moment, everything changed. What followed would shatter the way I saw my family forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. It really helps us bring you more true stories like this one. The house smelled like rosemary and garlic, the glaze on the ham bubbling in the oven. My boyfriend, Ethan, had just lit the last of the cranberry candles along the table. Every place setting was perfect, polished silverware, linen napkins folded like swans, and crystal wine glasses catching the glow of string lights above. When the doorbell rang, I smoothed my dress and swallowed the nervous lump in my throat. Dad stepped inside first, shaking off the cold, followed by Mom in her emerald scarf. They looked older somehow. A little tired. But Dad's eyes lit up at the sight of the spread. "This looks amazing," he said, clapping Ethan on the back before taking his seat. For a while, it was exactly how I'd hoped, stories about old Christmases, Dad laughing at Mom's exaggerated retellings, Ethan passing the potatoes like a pro. Then, halfway through dinner, something happened. Dad reached for the wine glass in front of him, fork still in his other hand. But he didn't take a sip. He didn't blink. His hand just stopped, frozen midair. His eyes weren't on his plate anymore, they were locked on Ethan. "Ethan," Dad said slowly, "spell your last name." "Brenner." Brenner. Dad's jaw tightened. "As in James Brenner?" Ethan hesitated, his fingers tightening around his fork. "That's my father." The room went still. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock over the mantel. My own heartbeat was suddenly the loudest thing in the house. Dad leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on Ethan. "Then we have a problem." The word seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the scent of rosemary and ham. Mom's gaze darted between them, her hand frozen halfway to her water glass. We finished dinner in silence. No one reached for seconds. Even the clink of cutlery sounded too loud, like it didn't belong. 2 nights later, my phone rang. Dad's voice was tight, controlled. "Has he told you?" "Told me what?" I asked, pacing the living room. "That his father didn't just take my warehouse. He conned half this town. Tony, the Ramirezes, 3 other families I know of. And he walked into my house like it was nothing." That night, I confronted Ethan. We were cleaning up after dinner, the scent of lemon dish soap sharp in the air. "You knew who my dad was?" He hesitated. "I didn't want to ruin Christmas." I laughed, short and humorless. "Ruin Christmas? You think letting me introduce you to the men your father bankrupted, without saying a word, is protecting me?" Ethan's eyes flickered. "Your dad hates me for something I didn't do. What would telling him change?" "You don't get to decide that for me," I said quietly. That night, I didn't sleep. Christmas morning, Dad showed up at my door. No Santa hat. No wrapped gifts. Just a manila envelope tucked under his arm like it weighed more than bricks. Ethan was in the kitchen making coffee, the scent of cinnamon rolls drifting through the air. The sweetness didn't touch the cold edge in my stomach. Dad didn't wait to be invited in. He stepped past me, boots leaving faint wet marks on the hardwood, and went straight to the dining table. Without a word, he dropped the envelope onto the polished wood. It slid open on impact, spilling its contents, contracts, legal letters, yellowed news clippings with headlines like "Local Investor Vanishes with Millions." "I don't care if you were 8, Dad said, his voice low but hard. But you knew. And you said nothing." Ethan set his coffee mug down slowly. "I'm not my father." "No," Dad said, taking a step closer, "but you're the man who thought you could build a life with my daughter on a lie. And now you get to decide how you make it right." Ethan's throat bobbed. "Make it right? How?" "Every dollar your father took from me, I want back." And I don't care if it's from your bank account, your job, or whatever you have to sell. You've got 3 months. Ethan's laugh was short and humorless. You think I have that kind of money lying around? Dad leaned forward, resting his hands flat on the table. Then you'd better start finding it. Because until you do, I'll make sure everyone in this town who lost something because of your father knows exactly who you are. And they'll make sure you feel it. Ethan's jaw tightened. You'd ruin my life. Dad didn't blink. You walked into mine already ruined. I'm just returning the favor. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint crackle from the fireplace. Ethan looked at me then, like maybe I'd step in, take his side, soften my father's words. I didn't. Dad gathered the papers back into the envelope, tucking them under his arm again. 3 months, he said, and walked to the door. He didn't look back, didn't wait for a reply. The door shut with a quiet finality that felt heavier than a slam. The first week after, I started noticing changes. Ethan's watch disappeared from the dresser. His leather jacket went missing from the coat rack. When I asked, he muttered something about selling a few things. By mid-January, he was working late nights and weekends, coming home smelling faintly of dust and motor oil from some side job he'd picked up. Dad never called to check in, but I knew he didn't have to. He wasn't bluffing, he never bluffed. Some nights I'd catch Ethan sitting at the kitchen table long after I'd gone to bed, stacks of papers spread in front of him, a calculator clicking steadily. He'd stop when he heard me, shove everything into a folder, and pretend he was just paying bills. February came and went in a blur of overtime shifts, quiet dinners, and the sound of our old coffee maker sputtering before dawn. The space between us grew wider, not from arguments, but from the weight of what neither of us said out loud. By the time March rolled in, I could feel the deadline breathing down on the house like a storm cloud ready to burst. It was the first Friday in March when the knock came. Not the hesitant tap of a delivery driver or the neighbor dropping off misdelivered mail, this was firm, measured, deliberate. I opened the door to find Ethan standing there with his coat zipped to the chin, a large manila envelope clutched in both hands. His eyes were shadowed, his skin pale like he'd been living under fluorescent lights for weeks. "Is he here?" he asked. I didn't have to ask who he meant. I stepped aside and moments later Dad emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. His gaze dropped immediately to the envelope. Ethan crossed the room, placed it on the table, and slid it across the polished surface. "It's all there," he said quietly. "Every cent I could get." Dad didn't touch it right away. He just looked at Ethan for a long moment, searching his face like he was reading a confession written in invisible ink. Then, finally, he picked it up, opened the flap and glanced inside. A single nod. "We're even," Dad said, tucking the envelope under his arm. "But you'll never be welcome at my table." Ethan flinched, but he didn't argue. He just nodded once, turned, and walked out without another word. The door closed behind him, and the silence that followed felt like a long exhale after months of holding my breath. That night, I packed his things. No shouting. No tears. Just the soft scrape of hangers across the closet rod, the thud of drawers closing for the last time. Spring came early that year. The snow melted from the gutters, the days grew longer, and the air carried that faint, damp scent of things waking up after a long winter. The house felt different, lighter somehow, as though a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying had finally slipped off my shoulders. One Sunday, I drove to Dad's place. The scent of tamales drifted out to the porch before I even knocked. He was in the kitchen, chopping onions with the same steady rhythm I remembered from childhood. "Why'd you push him that hard?" I asked, leaning against the counter. Dad didn't look up. "Because people like that don't understand words. They only understand loss. And now he understands." He set the knife down, met my eyes. "And so do you." We carried the food to the table, smaller without Ethan's chair but somehow fuller. The hum of the ceiling fan, the warm glow from the window, the clink of plates between us, it all felt whole. I thought about the envelope Ethan had handed over, about the way Dad had slipped it under his arm without counting it in front of him. Justice, I realized, didn't always come with shouting or spectacle. Sometimes it came quietly, in a man keeping his word, in a door closing and never reopening. Dad raised his glass. "To better tables," he said. I smiled, lifting mine. To better tables. We drank, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like anything was hanging over me. The storm had passed. The debt, in money and in pride, had been paid. And that was enough. Spring came early that year. The snow melted from the gutters, the days grew longer, and the air carried that faint, damp scent of things waking up after a long winter. The house felt different, lighter somehow, as though a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying had finally slipped off my shoulders. One Sunday, I drove to Dad's place. The scent of tamales drifted out to the porch before I even knocked. He was in the kitchen, chopping onions with the same steady rhythm I remembered from childhood. "Why'd you push him that hard?" I asked, leaning against the counter. Dad didn't look up. "Because people like that don't understand words. They only understand loss. And now he understands." He set the knife down, met my eyes. "And so do you." We carried the food to the table, smaller without Ethan's chair but somehow fuller. The hum of the ceiling fan, the warm glow from the window, the clink of plates between us, it all felt whole. I thought about the envelope Ethan had handed over, about the way Dad had slipped it under his arm without counting it in front of him. Justice, I realized, didn't always come with shouting or spectacle. Sometimes it came quietly, in a man keeping his word, in a door closing and never reopening. Dad raised his glass. "To better tables," he said. I smiled, lifting mine. To better tables. We drank, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like anything was hanging over me. The storm had passed. The debt, in money and in pride, had been paid. And that was enough. A week after that quiet Sunday dinner at Dad's, my phone rang late in the evening. I almost didn't answer when I saw the number, Ethan's. The last time we'd spoken was the night he'd left, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, eyes fixed on the floor. Curiosity got the better of me. I swiped to answer. He didn't start with hello. "Your father's not finished with me, is he?" I stayed silent for a moment, listening to the strain in his voice. It was the same tone I'd heard in December, when Dad first laid down his terms, tight, brittle, edged with panic. "What makes you say that?" I asked evenly. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "Two of the families he mentioned. They called me this week. One said they'd been given my name. Another asked if I was James Brenner's son before slamming the phone down." I closed my eyes. "You knew this might happen." "I thought once I paid him, that was it." His voice cracked. "Now I'm starting to think he's just getting started." There was a pause. I could picture him pacing wherever he was, running a hand through his hair like he used to when the pressure got too much. "Then maybe," I said quietly, "you should start living a life that doesn't give people reasons to remember your father." The silence stretched, heavy and awkward. Finally, he muttered goodbye and hung up. I stared at the screen for a long moment before setting the phone down. If Dad was still moving pieces behind the scenes, I wasn't going to stop him. Some debts, I realized, weren't meant to be cleared in just 3 months. It was the middle of April when I pulled into Dad's driveway and noticed a sleek black sedan parked at the curb. Not the kind of car you usually saw in our neighborhood, too polished, too expensive, too out of place. Through the front window, I spotted Dad at the kitchen table with a man and woman I didn't recognize. The man wore a crisp gray suit, his hair silver but perfectly styled. The woman had a leather folder open in front of her, papers neatly stacked inside. I stepped in quietly, catching the tail end of a sentence from Dad. "And if we coordinate, we can make sure none of us ever have to deal with him again." The woman looked up and smiled faintly at me. "You must be his daughter." Dad gestured for me to sit. These are the Ramirez family, he explained. Your old friend Ethan has been hearing from them, too. The man in the suit nodded once. Your father told us what happened. You should know, we've been waiting 20 years for an opportunity like this. I glanced between them. Opportunity for what? To close the book, the woman said, sliding a page toward Dad for his signature. For good. Dad picked up his pen without hesitation, signing with the steady hand of someone who'd been ready for this a long time. Then he looked at me, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Some storms, he said, are worth chasing until they're finished. I didn't know exactly what they were planning, but as I watched the three of them shake hands, I realized one thing: Ethan's 3 months had bought him nothing more than a head start. By May, I'd almost stopped thinking about Ethan. Life had settled into a calmer rhythm: work, weekends with Dad, dinners that didn't feel like I was walking across a tightrope. But the ripple of what happened hadn't faded, it had only spread further out. One afternoon, while I was closing up at work, my coworker Lena leaned over the counter with a conspiratorial look. Hey, do you know an Ethan Brenner? I froze for half a second. Why? She lowered her voice. Guy came in here looking for a job. Said he had construction experience, but she trailed off, glancing toward the office. Our manager Googled him. All these old articles about his dad popped up, and some recent stuff too. People talking in forums, saying he's just like his father. I knew exactly where that recent stuff came from. He's not getting hired here, Lena added, shrugging. Boss doesn't want the drama. On my drive home, I passed the old warehouse district where Dad used to run his business. Most of the buildings were vacant now, their windows boarded up, graffiti curling over brick walls. And I thought about how a man like James Brenner could burn through people's lives and leave nothing but hollow shells behind. When I pulled into Dad's driveway, he was on the porch, sipping coffee and reading the paper like nothing in the world was out of place. Ethan's looking for work, I said casually. Dad didn't even look up. Good for him. The sooner he learns what it's like to start at the bottom, the better. The way he said it, I knew he wasn't just talking about a job. June sunlight spilled across my kitchen table, warm and bright, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the last 6 months had aged me years. The storm that started on Christmas night had finally burned itself out, not with an explosion, but with a slow, grinding certainty. I hadn't heard from Ethan in weeks. Word had trickled back through friends of friends: he'd left town, sold his car, and was living somewhere in Oregon. No job yet, no stable address. Just gone. Dad came over that afternoon, a paper bag in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. Thought we'd try your mom's old roast recipe, he said, setting the bag on the counter. The way he said it made my chest tighten, not with grief this time, but with a kind of quiet gratitude. We cooked together in easy silence, the smell of garlic and herbs filling the house. When we finally sat down to eat, Dad poured us each a glass and raised his. To starting fresh, he said. I met his eyes. To clean slates. We clinked glasses, and for the first time since that night in December, I felt something settle in me, like all the debts, spoken and unspoken, had been cleared. Justice hadn't come with a grand finale. It had come in pieces: an envelope on a table, a door closing for good, a man learning what it meant to lose more than money. And as I watched Dad cut into his roast, the summer light soft on his face, I realized that was enough. The past was behind us. The table felt full. And this time, no one's hand froze midair. And that's how a Christmas dinner turned into the beginning of the end, not just for a relationship, but for a lie that had been sitting in plain sight for months. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have given Ethan a chance to explain, or would you have let my father handle it exactly the way he did? I'd love to hear your thoughts, drop them in the comments below. Thanks for listening, and until next time, remember, sometimes justice doesn't shout. Sometimes it just quietly closes the door.